Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. So if you're new to the channel, every week I'll do a preview video of the upcoming game week, a little review of how the previous game week went for me and my team. And this season, I'm going to take a look at my mini league, who's had the best week and who's currently sits top of the league. So if you are new to the channel and you would like to stay in contact with all the content, it'd be great to have you subscribed. We're closing in on 500 subscribers. So if you can help, that would be really appreciated. The league code, if you haven't joined yet, is on the screen now. We're going to sort of close entries in a couple of days before game week 2. So it's not too late to join, but I don't want people to be added on, midway through the season if they're having an amazing season. I'd like people to be involved from the start. So more than welcome to come and join the mini league and see if you can beat my team. So shout out to manager of the week, Marmoush Mello. So Thomas, well done. What a fantastic week, really. Bench boost used. And I think whilst you're going to use your bench boost, you can use it in any week. And you look at his team here, and can imagine that this is his genuine bench. You look at sometimes people use a bench boost and they kind of just put their best players on the bench to say, look, I've had a 45-point bench boost. But I can imagine, Semenyo will have been on the bench. Mark Gahey will have been on the bench. Unlucky for Mark Gui, no points there. But I think, what is it, a 23-point bench boost? That's pretty amazing. If you can get a bench boost of that amount, that's really good, to be honest. I think I'd take that when I use my bench boost, which could be this week. Now, one downside of this team, if you're going to have Marmoush in the team name, is he not supposed to be on the team as well? I always think if these teams that have amazing names, but they don't have the player involved, not that he'd be a better pick than Reinders, of course, as my team found out this game week. So well done to you, mate. Done awesome with this week. Be interested to see if you can keep it going. About 2K in the world. It's only after game week 1, but you'd rather be there than not. So my team for this game week just gone was all right. Like we look at here, the team, and 65 points all out was not too bad. Pickford was on for a clean sheet yesterday, didn't quite happen for him, but a game week rank of 1.7 million, I'll take it. I think it's as long as you can finish sort of around a million every week, you're doing all right, and your scores will just get better. I think Semenyo in the first match of the week, we've talked about a little bit what a good pickup that was. And I was amazed that people didn't talk about him at all. I understand Liverpool away is a difficult fixture, but now everyone's looking at that and saying Bournemouth have good fixtures. And sometimes you can get a little bit short sighted with the immediate fixtures and it puts you off players. Would I get him in right now? Maybe. Depends who it is. Up front, not as good. Jimenez and Welbeck and Strand Larsen even. None of them returned, but they're going to have weeks where they're not going to return. I didn't see anyone below 6.5 million who would do any better. A lot of people got in full crook. I can't see that. And, Marmoush, you look at Reinders getting 10 points. Reinders for me wasn't in the thinking. It was, he wasn't at this price point. I would compare Reinders points to someone like a Mohamed Kudus or a Semenyo, someone who is closer to that price. I wouldn't have swapped Marmoush for Reinders in game week 1. I'd have just had 3 million in the bank. I probably wouldn't have been able to reinvest it. Maybe I could have upgraded the strikers. So, I'm not necessarily comparing Marmoush to Reinders. I'm comparing Marmoush to players like Verts, Bruno Fernandes, players that are around that price point. Both of the other options didn't do as well. And the same with the strikers. You look at a Watkins, well, he didn't score either. So I don't think there was any positions on the pitch where I look at it and think, oh, I had a bit of a nightmare there. There's always going to be players who outscore your team. But if you're not going to, if you weren't considering them already, it's not necessarily a bad decision. None of us can predict all the highest point scores for the week. So I'm pretty okay with my team, and I'm not going to make any transfers this game week unless there's an injury that happens before the deadline. So the fixtures for this game week, another Friday kickoff, and for me, it does feed into captaincy. So we look at the predicted points here. We've got Salah and Saka joint top. and Haaland right behind. So there's a bit of a smaller point spread than there was last week. Last week, Salah was top by point and a half. And you're really splitting hairs here. And I look at someone like Palmer, who I'm thinking of captaining, and at predicted points, obviously they don't necessarily mean anything. They're just trying to get a sort of a metric, an idea for you to go off. But 6.2 points, well, that's the same points as if my defender was to keep a clean sheet and get, so, if they got some defensive contributions and a bonus point, they'd be on 9. So I know that Palmer can obviously outscore 6.2, and he probably is going to be my captaincy option, but it doesn't seem like a huge amount of points. I think you can go with anyone this game week. Saka at home to Leeds is probably the highest upside captain, but I wouldn't transfer Saka in just to captain him this game week. He didn't get any returns against Man United. I'm not too sure that he would, blow Leeds out of the water, even though it is at home for Arsenal. So I think possibly Haaland is maybe the best captaincy option this game week. Salah plays Newcastle away. Newcastle at home are a really good team. Palmer plays West Ham away. And I think that's a good person to target because of how poor West Ham in game week 1. But now they're at home, Chelsea are away, and you're really captaining Palmer because West Ham were so bad rather than Chelsea being so good. So for me, it's probably Palmer, and then because I don't own Haaland, if I owned Haaland, I think I'd go for him. So let's take a look at my team for this upcoming game week. And I am considering bench boosting, and I'll talk about why. Because for me, even though I haven't planned for a bench boost, it wasn't in my thoughts when I was getting in my Game Week 1 squad. I think any game week where you look at your bench and you think, oh yeah, I'd be okay starting them, or you've got a difficult benching decision, think just play it. It's the smallest upside chip. We've just seen for the manager of the week that it can work out really well. A player you bench can sometimes score points. How many times do we start players and they score 1 or 2 points? Happens every week. And I think if you can get 10 to 15 points on your bench boost, that's absolutely fine. You can't predict exactly when you're going to have the best week for benches, and sometimes it's when Semenyo plays Liverpool away. It's just how it happens. So Dubravka in the bench, I would be tempted to start him this game week, and again feeds into my reasoning. Because he plays Sunderland at home. You look at the rest of those fixtures and you think, well, I'm not going to want to use him on a bench boost anytime soon after this. And by that point, later in the season, I might have injuries, for the rest of my squad, that I need to sort of take transfers for. At the moment, I don't have to use transfers to maximize my bench boost. If I took a free transfer to bring in someone in just for a bench boost, then free transfers are really worth 4 points each. So that person coming in would need to get 4 points just to break even. And then if I have another situation the next week, I might need to take a points hit as a result, which I try and avoid. Pickford at home against Brighton as well is a good fixture. So into defence, and it's kind of the same with Anderson. Game week 4 he plays Leeds at home, which is obviously a good fixture, but that's when someone like a Dubravka plays Liverpool, so cancels each other out a little bit. I think with the defence, I don't mind playing any of them. I think a lot of them, because they play home, that really does help. It's quite rare that out of 7 defensive players here, only one of them is playing away. Cucurella away at West Ham. And again, I've got some players playing each other. You've got the Chelsea West Ham sort of clash. I can hedge my bets a little bit when I get in, or if I'm captaining Palmer, because if West Ham keep a clean sheet, that's great. Wan-Bissaka would have been on my bench anyway. If West Ham don't keep a clean sheet, there's a chance that Palmer has scored or got an assist, and if that's the case, I've captained him. So it's working both ways. I'm kind of just hedging my bets and benefiting either side. If all 3 players or 4 players on my bench just get 2 points each, I'll just take that and move on, because sometimes I think the bench boost can be really overworked and over thought out. And I think any week you just see your bench and you say, all right, that's good. I'll bench boost this week. and you just get it out the way. Marmoush is a question mark because he didn't start this week against Wolves. I do think he's more likely to start this game week against Spurs. Spurs at home for Man City would be really interesting, and Marmoush has probably been sold by a few people, but I think he is someone that I wanted him in game week one. I knew there was a risk that he would get benched at some point. I think because they played Wolves, I don't think they're going to play Oscar Bob and Bernardo Silva every week. I think it was just an easier fixture, and now they're playing Spurs. I do see Marmoush starting. I've put Kudus on the bench because I'm trying to get a genuine, honest bench boost here. And Kudus is someone who probably would be benched, but Man City have been known to concede goals. Kudus played really well. There is a chance that he gets transferred out in a few weeks for me, depending on how he continues to do. But that Man City away, I can see him getting some sort of attacking return. He looks like he's up for it, in the eye test. And I think the eye test does pay into that quite a lot. Up front, I'm going to start all three strikers. Got Welbeck on the screen here because, again, he came off the bench, but Brighton weren't full of goal threat against Fulham. So I'm hoping that he does start. Everton didn't look great against Leeds. So I'm thinking, whilst I've kind of got a Pickford Welbeck clash here in my squad, again, I'm kind of getting points either way. So either Pickford will keep a clean sheet or hopefully Welbeck will be involved in an attacking return. And I think when have that clash, I think bench boosting just to sort of top up your overall points and because you're hopefully getting points one way or another just helps benefit your squad. So the strengths are of my team in general, there's no urgent issues, which again feeds into the bench boost. I think having no problems with injuries right now just means I can bench boost, get out of the way. Next week, someone might get a red card this week. We saw it with Concert, just completely out of the blue. Someone might get an injury. There's international break coming up where someone could get injured as well. I think bench boosting right now just makes a bit more sense. And I do have good depth in my team as well. It's not a weak bench as it is. There's no 4 million defenders being benched here. And, Kudus played really well. So there is a risk that if I bench him and start someone like a Welbeck, just because I think the fixture's easier, that Kudus outscores some players that are in my starting 11. The weaknesses for me is potentially Marmoush because he's not starting, but I'm not panicking. I think we spend ages looking at players before the season, and then after a game week, we just panic and sell them or buy players in. Just give them a bigger sample size. They've not turned a bad player overnight. I think just, you know, stick with them and see how it goes with a bigger sample size. Burnley long term is another potential weakness. They don't look great, and I can see them really struggling this season, which again, play the bench boost now. It's the best game they're going to have and just get it out of the way. So I'm pretty certain that I probably will play the bench boost. I would say I'm like 90% sure. The only thing that would stop me is an injury that would, prevent it because I don't want to use a transfer this game week. I want to try and build up transfers for using them in the international break because I think that is a really good time just to have flexibility. But I am going to put another video out in a couple of days just talking about transferred players as well and whether it's worth it and whether you should get them in at this stage. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully, it helps you out with your own team thoughts, not as data driven as the other videos, but a different style, and some of you might appreciate that. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening. Please do subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.